My name is Michael Turner. I'm 54 years old. Born and raised in a small town in Ohio, where people still wave from their front porches and call each other neighbor. And if you asked anyone around here what I am, they'd tell you I'm the kind of bloke who fixes things, pays his bills on time, and keeps his word. A simple man who believes that trust is the currency that makes life bearable. I always used to say, you give someone your trust and you're handing them the keys to your heart, your home, your peace of mind. You don't give those keys to just anyone. You hand them to family, to the folks who've been around when the chips are down, the people who will help you mend a fence or a broken jaw without asking for anything in return. I believed that with the stubborn certainty of someone who'd been through enough winters to know the difference between a passing storm and a storm that would strip the paint off the house. But what I learned, and what I learned the hard way, the kind of truth that slips into your bones and makes you feel colder than a December night, is that smiles can be maps leading straight to a blade. Some people smile at you only to measure your back, to see where to place the knife. And they'll do it with such perfect manners that you'll be the last to notice. I never imagined betrayal would come from someone I called family. From someone I'd fed, supported, protected, and believed in, because that's not how family is supposed to work. Family is supposed to be shelter, not arsonists with a match in their pocket. Her name was Claire, my niece, my late brother's daughter, and she had a way of folding gratitude into every Uncle Mike like a practiced act. She thanked me for the house, for the steady job I'd found her, for the small comforts I could afford, and those thank yous were like soft blankets in the beginning. I welcomed her into my home when she had nowhere to go, opened a spare bedroom like you'd open your heart to a lost dog, gave her a new start, a safe place, a chance to rebuild her life after things with her mother had gone pear-shaped, and the world had started to look a touch crueler than usual. I helped her fill out job applications, drove her to interviews when her car died, lent her money when rent came due. Told myself I was just doing what any decent bloke would do, being a family man, doing the right thing. But behind that warm smile, behind every Uncle Mike, thank you, there were lies so smooth and so carefully polished they nearly burned my whole life to the ground. She wore gratitude like a coat, and underneath that coat she kept secrets that moved like smoke through the vents of my house. At first it was little things, unexplained phone calls, a missed appointment that turned into a late-night excuse, and I shrugged them off, thinking I was being protective, thinking maybe I was being a little over the top. Then the small things started to line up like dominoes, and when the first tile fell, everything cascaded in ways I never saw coming. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was polite, patient, and surgical. It was the kind of betrayal that didn't explode on the front porch, but emptied the safe in the middle of the night, and left a note that said thanks for everything with a smiley face. I don't tell you this for pity. I tell you because I need you to understand how a man who'd spent a lifetime trusting people can be taught. A lesson so bitter it rewires his sense of right and wrong. It made me harden where I used to be soft, made me listen to my gut when before I'd put it to the side for the sake of family. And when it comes to what I did next, the quiet, patient, calculated course of revenge that followed, I won't call it violence, because nothing about it read like a pulp novel. It was a slow unmasking, a careful taking away of the warm light she'd used to warm herself at my table. I won't sing about fire and gore. I'll tell you about legal papers served at dawn, about jobs quietly lost, about reputations stripped by truth, about friends asked to look closely and then step away. I'll tell you how I turned the very kindness I'd shown her into the instrument that exposed her, How I learned to be a different kind of keeper of the keys. One who locks doors when needed and who won't let smiles decide the fate of his house. If you're sitting there thinking you know where this tale goes, reckon again, because this isn't just an old man's lament or a simple bait and switch. It's the story of how a man named Michael, who believed in neighbors and hard work, discovered that forgiveness without boundaries is a bloody dangerous thing, and how he chose a revenge that was patient enough to be surgical and merciful enough to leave him awake at night. This is the beginning, the slice before the full dish arrives, and what follows will show you just how far a man will go. When the one person he sheltered with his own hands uses that shelter to stage a lie.
I wasn't always a lonely man, and I want to make that clear. Because when people hear the rest of this story, they assume I'm some old hermit tucked away in a creaking house with the blinds always half drawn and nothing but the sound of the refrigerator humming at night. Truth is, I used to have noise. I used to have warmth. I used to have that picture everyone paints when they say the American dream. There was a time my house smelled like pancakes on Sunday mornings and sounded like laughter bouncing through the hallway. A time when the living room floor was scattered with toy trucks and my wife would call my name from the kitchen, half annoyed, half smiling. I had a life that felt full, steady, familiar, but life rarely storms in and tears everything apart in one blow. It's quieter than that, slower. It takes things piece by piece, like it's being careful, almost polite about the damage. My marriage didn't explode. It dissolved. Years of distance, exhaustion, small misunderstandings that turned into silent evenings. My wife and I didn't hate each other. We just ran out of us. That realization hit softer than a slap, but deeper than a bruise. The day we signed the divorce papers, we didn't cry. We just sat there, two people who used to be everything to each other, staring at paperwork that made us strangers. Then the kids grew, as they should. They found jobs, lives, partners. One moved to Texas, the other up in Minnesota. I was proud, but the house, once loud and full of messy life, started to echo. The walls remember laughter even long after it's gone. And let me tell you, silence gets heavy when it settles in. So when Claire called me that spring afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a half-finished cup of coffee, trying to convince myself I was fine with the quiet. Her voice was shaking so badly I had to press the phone closer to my ear to make sure I heard her right. She said her job had let her go. Her boyfriend threw her out, and she didn't have anywhere to go. And when she said, "Uncle Mike, I don't know what I would do without you," cracked something open in me that I thought had hardened shut forever. You have to understand. Claire wasn't just some niece I saw on holidays. She was my brother's only child. And my brother, he was gone. 5 years gone. A heart attack on an October morning that still doesn't feel real. He and I made a promise when we were barely old enough to shave. If something happens to one of us, the other protects the family. It was just two kids talking big, but some promises don't fade. So I went. Picked her up from the bus station. The spring wind was sharp that day, tossing her hair around like it didn't know where it belonged. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. Like life had scooped out pieces of her and left her trying to stitch herself back together with shaking hands. When she hugged me, I felt her ribs. She held on like she was afraid I'd disappear too. I brought her home. The house, which had felt like an empty box for years, suddenly had footsteps again. I cleared out the guest room, washed the sheets, told her to take all the time she needed to get back on her feet. And for a while, things were good. I helped her apply for work. Got her a job doing bookkeeping at the manufacturing company outside town. Bought her some clothes so she wouldn't be walking into interviews wearing the same worn-out sweater. We started having dinner together most nights, talking, laughing sometimes. Real laughter, not the kind you force. And I won't lie, it felt good. It felt like maybe life wasn't done giving me things. Maybe this was my second chance at being needed, at having someone in the house who didn't just exist here but belonged here. I remember thinking more than once that my brother would have been proud of me. That I was doing right by. Him. But here's the thing about people. Sometimes, What you see is only the cover of a book written in a language you don't yet understand, behind that soft voice Claire used when she thanked me. Behind the way she lowered her eyes like she was humble. Behind the apologies, the gentle laughs, the quiet footsteps. Something else was there, growing. A secret, a hunger. Not the hunger of someone needing help. No. The hunger of someone who sees opportunity and starts calculating. A slow, creeping thing. Like ivy climbing the outside of a house, you don't notice it until it's already wrapped around the brick. Tightening, spreading, finding its way into the cracks. Looking back, I can see the signs. Small ones. The late nights she didn't explain. The phone calls that stopped when I walked into the room. The smile that felt rehearsed, but at the time, I saw none of it. I was just grateful. To not eat dinner alone, I was just happy to hear footsteps. In the hallway again, I was just a man who believed that helping family couldn't possibly be a mistake. And because I believed that, I didn't see the first piece of my life fall away, then the second, then the third, until one day, I woke up and realized someone had been quietly rearranging the foundation of my world while I was still holding the door open for them. The thing about betrayal is that it never kicks the door down and announces itself. It doesn't come in loud or angry. It slips in quiet, like a cold draft under the door. So soft you barely feel it, until one morning you realize your whole damn house is freezing. And at first, it was nothing I could put a finger on. Little things. The kind of things you excuse because you want to believe the people you love would never hurt you. The first cracks are always small enough to ignore if you squint hard enough. I'd come home from work around 5:30, the same time every day. My routines were my comfort. Dinner at 6, a little TV, then bed. Nothing complicated. But I started noticing things in the garage weren't where I left them. My tools, the one thing I always kept neat, were shifted around. Not stolen. Not missing. Just moved. A wrench lying where the hammer should be. The drill sitting out with the battery drained. Little signs. Almost like someone was looking for something but didn't want me to know they were there. I told myself I must have forgotten. I'm getting older, right? Maybe I just misplaced things. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wanted to believe that explanation more than the ones my gut whispered. Then her schedule changed. Claire used to be home by 6. At least that's what she told me. But lately, she started coming home later. Some nights it was 8 o'clock. Other nights even later. She'd come through the door smiling, that soft, sweet, practiced smile of hers, and say, "Well, just overtime, Uncle Mike. They're working us hard this week." But something didn't sit right about that. Maybe it was the way she avoided looking at me when she said it. Maybe it was how she rushed past me to her room, like she didn't want me to have a second to ask anything more. I didn't push. I didn't want to be that suspicious old man who thinks everyone under 40 is up to something. Trust is a hard thing to break when you've spent your whole life defending it. Then the mail started changing. That's when I should have listened to my gut. At first, it was just extra envelopes. Companies I didn't recognize. "Welcome to your new credit program. Your account has been activated." You know, the kind spam that usually goes straight into the trash. I didn't think much of it. The world is full of junk mail and companies trying to sell something. But then the bills started coming. Bills with amounts I didn't recognize. Monthly payments to stores I've never shopped at. Companies I've never heard of. Credit lines I never opened. I'd stand at the kitchen counter with these envelopes spread out like evidence and tell myself it had to be a mistake. A clerical error. Identity mix-up. Anything but what the truth was trying to tell me. Because the moment you let that first thought in, the one that says, maybe the person under your roof is hurting you, you feel something inside you shift. And I wasn't ready for that shift. Not yet. Then came the envelope that didn't let me look away anymore. It was a plain white envelope. Nothing special. Except the name printed on it, Claire Turner, my last name, my address, my house. As if she was the homeowner. As if she was the Turner. As if I was just... There, my hands went cold before I even opened it. Inside was a loan approval notice. $10,000. Approved. In my name. Linked to my bank. With her signature, my heart didn't drop. It tightened. like someone had reached inside and squeezed. My breathing got shallow. I remember the kitchen light flickering overhead and the refrigerator humming too loud. Like the whole house knew before I did. And right then, right in the middle of that moment, where my world was tilting, she walked in. Grocery bags in her arms. Talking about how eggs cost as much as gold nowadays. Laughing like nothing in the world was wrong. Like she hadn't just reached into my life and carved out a piece of it without asking. I looked at her. Really looked, her smile, her eyes, her posture. Everything about her was so practiced, so careful, so intentional. And I felt my throat tighten with every emotion fighting to come through confusion. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief. I wanted to ask her right then. I wanted to lay that letter on the counter and say, "Explain this." But accusing family, someone you opened your home to, is like cutting your own skin. You know the wound is going to come from your own hand. You're not sure you'll survive the bleeding. So I didn't ask, I didn't confront. I folded the letter, tucked it into my jacket pocket, and I watched her really. Watched her how she avoided my eyes when she walked past me, how fast she shut her bedroom door, how her smile never quite reached her face anymore. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the letter burning in my pocket, the truth echoing in my chest. That was the night I stopped being the man who trusted her, and became the man she didn't know was watching. Because once doubt takes root, it grows. 2 weeks slid by like slow-moving fog, the kind that sits low over a quiet town so you can't see what's coming toward you until it's too late. I stopped being the man who left his house without thinking. I started becoming a shadow inside my own life. Every morning I'd take my keys, step out the front door like it was any other day, lock it behind me, walk to my truck, start the engine, and then I'd roll quietly down the street, turn the corner, and park where the elm tree hid me just well enough. I'd sit there and watch my own home the way a cop watches a suspect's safe house. The first morning I did it, I felt ashamed. The second morning, I felt nervous. By the third morning, I felt something colder, something I didn't even recognize at first. A sense of knowing. The kind of knowing you don't want to admit you have. I wasn't watching to protect her. I was watching to confirm what I already feared. Claire didn't leave for work like she told me. She didn't walk to the bus stop with her little tote bag and her neat sweater like some earnest office girl. No, she waited. Always waited. Like she was making sure I was gone, making sure the house was hers for a while. And when she finally stepped outside, she rarely looked around. She didn't think she needed to, because trust had been her camouflage, her cloak. She wore makeup now. Heavy foundation, thick eyeliner, bright lips, perfume that hit the air like a flare gun. Clothes that didn't match the simple, quiet girl I picked up from the bus station. Clothes that spoke louder, clothes that wanted to be seen, and she wasn't going anywhere. Near the office, she was going to him. I watched her meet him behind the old diner near the rail tracks. The diner with the peeling red paint and the flickering neon sign that buzzes like a tired fly. The place where secrets go to get traded in small, crumpled envelopes. The man was tall, shoulders broad, like he thought they gave him authority. Scruffy beard, leather jacket, gold chain. The kind of man who carries trouble in his pocket and smiles like he's immune to consequences. She would hand him something. He would hand her something back. Small bags. White powder. I felt something inside me twist. Not anger, not fear. Something sadder. Something like disappointment that has aged long enough to turn bitter. I didn't confront her. I told myself I needed proof. I told myself I needed the full picture. But the truth is simpler. I needed time to understand how far I had already lost her. One night, when she was in her room sleeping, I walked into mine with the quiet steps of a man hoping to discover he's wrong. I opened my dresser drawer, the one place in the house I thought was untouchable. My brother's watch was gone, not a fancy watch. Not gold, not silver, just his. The one he wore when we were kids working on our first car. The one he had on the day we buried our mother. The one he left on my nightstand the last time he stayed in my home before the Sickness took him. That watch wasn't. Worth money? It was worth him. And she took it. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the empty space in that drawer for a long time. Long enough to realize this wasn't some mistake. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't accident. This was intentional. She wasn't just using me. She was stripping me, piece by piece. Knew exactly which pieces hurt the most. And yet, somewhere inside me, the voice of my brother still spoke. Take care of her. Mike, it made everything worse. Because to betray a stranger is cruel. But to betray someone who loves you, that's a different kind of violence. Not loud, not sharp, not sharp. Seen a quiet theft, a slow draining, a rot in the beams of a house that still looks strong from the outside, and I think that's when I finally understood. She didn't come to me because she needed family. She came because I was. Easy, predictable, lonely, trusting, and she had a plan from the moment she stepped off that bus. But I wasn't. Done not by a long shot, because if she was going to keep secrets, then so was I.
It was a Wednesday, the kind of Wednesday that sits heavy in the middle of the week like a full stomach after a bad meal. The sky felt low, like the clouds were leaning down to listen. The air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet, like the world was holding something back, waiting for the right moment to let go. I remember walking up the driveway with that quiet feeling that something was wrong. Not loud wrong, not obvious wrong, just tilted, like a picture on the wall that you don't notice until it's pointed out, and then you can't stop seeing it. The house was silent, not peaceful, not calm, just empty. Her car wasn't there. No sound of the TV. No music humming under her door. Just the kind of stillness that doesn't fit a home. Felt staged, like a room waiting for a scene to happen. Her bedroom door was half open. I've always believed a closed door means privacy. And I've always believed privacy is something you respect, especially when you love someone. But something pulled me forward anyway. Not curiosity, not suspicion, instinct. Like some part of me already knew what I was about to find. Her laptop was on the bed, still glowing, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I sat down. I didn't touch anything at first. I just stared, because part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, to keep pretending, to keep holding on to the version of her I had built in my head. But pretending is a door that eventually locks behind you. The messages were open. No password. No hiding. No shame. Her and him. His name was Rico. I had pictured a dozen possible relationships. Maybe he was someone she loved. Someone who understood her pain. Someone she was afraid to introduce to me. But the messages weren't about love. They were about numbers, transfers, routes, timing. They were about stealing. From me, line after line, I saw my life broken down into pieces the way a butcher breaks down a carcass. My bank accounts, my credit, my home equity, my insurance, my identity, all packaged, calculated, and exchanged like I was nothing but a walking resource. And there were jokes. God, the jokes. She didn't call me Uncle Mike when she spoke to him. She called me the old fool, the wallet, the house pig, the gullible idiot. I didn't feel the ground fall out from under me. I felt myself fall out of myself, like something inside me loosened and slipped. There is a type of quiet that comes when the heart finally accepts what the mind has known for a while. A hollow quiet, a tired quiet, the kind of quiet a battlefield must have after the last bullet stops echoing. I sat on her bed with my hands clasped, staring at the screen, feeling nothing at first, just empty. People think betrayal hits like lightning. It doesn't. It hits like erosion. Slow, patient, and then suddenly the land gives way. I left the house without a sound. No slamming doors. No heavy footsteps. No storm of rage. Just my keys in my hand and the pavement stretching out in front of me. I drove until the highway became a dark ribbon. Until the lights of the town disappeared behind me. Until the engine felt like the only heartbeat left in my chest. No music. No radio. Just the hum of the road and the ache of something breaking slow. I don't know how many hours passed before I came back. Maybe 3. Maybe 5. Maybe it was still Wednesday. Maybe it wasn't. When I walked back into the house, she was there, sitting on the couch. Feet kicked up on the coffee table. I refinished myself. Eating pizza I bought. Laughing into her phone like her world was perfect. Her laugh used to remind me of family. Now it sounded like something sharp. She looked over her shoulder when she heard the door. That same smile. The one that had fooled me. The one that had softened me. The one that had made me believe she needed saving. Warm. Soft. Sweet. God, it was a beautiful smile. And it was a lie. The rage didn't come in shouting. Came like fire spreading across dry field grass. Fast. Hungry. Direct. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked past her. Sat in my old chair. The one that had molded to the shape of my back after years of quiet evenings and long thoughts. I rested my hands on my knees. Looked straight into her eyes. No anger in my voice. No shake. No stutter. Just truth. Claire, I said, steady as a judge delivering a sentence. We need to talk. Her smile froze. Not faded. Froze. Because she knew. She knew right then. The game was over. The curtain had dropped. The mask had cracked. And what came next was going to change everything. She was still holding her phone when I spoke. One leg crossed over the other, fingers tapping her knee, like she had all the comfort in the world. She barely bothered to turn her head. She had no idea the ground under her feet had already cracked. I said her name once, slow and level. She looked at me, and immediately the performance started. That soft tilt of her head, the concerned eyebrows, the gentle voice she used when she wanted to seem harmless. Oh? About what? Are you okay? You look tired. Tired. That word felt like someone had pressed a thumb into a bruise. I didn't move from the chair. I didn't clench my fists. I didn't let the anger in my chest reach my face. I just looked at her, quiet, steady, unblinking. Silence is a mirror. It reflects people back to themselves, whether they like the reflection or not. I asked her one sentence. Where's my brother's watch? And something flashed across her face. Not guilt. Not shame. Recognition. She knew exactly what I meant. It was only a split second, but it was enough. Like seeing a flicker of the creature behind a mask before the mask resets. Her voice stumbled. Oh, I think maybe you misplaced it? I haven't seen. Stop. One word. Calm. Clean. Sharp enough to slice the air. And the performance fell apart. She didn't sigh. She didn't act hurt. She didn't try to hug her way out of it like she had done so many times when she wanted something. No. She dropped the act like a coat she didn't need anymore. She was still holding her phone when I spoke. One leg crossed over the other, fingers tapping her knee, like she had all the comfort in the world. She barely bothered to turn her head. She had no idea the ground under her feet had already cracked. I said her name once, slow and level. She looked at me, and immediately the performance started. That soft tilt of her head, the concerned eyebrows, the gentle voice she used when she wanted to seem harmless. Oh? About what? Are you okay? You look tired. Tired. That word felt like someone had pressed a thumb into a bruise. I didn't move from the chair. I didn't clench my fists. I didn't let the anger in my chest reach my face. I just looked at her, quiet, steady, unblinking. Silence is a mirror. It reflects people back to themselves, whether they like the reflection or not. I asked her one sentence. Where's my brother's watch? And something flashed across her face. Not guilt. Not shame. Recognition. She knew exactly what I meant. It was only a split second, but it was enough. Like seeing a flicker of the creature behind a mask before the mask resets. Her voice stumbled. Oh, I think maybe you misplaced it? I haven't seen. Stop. One word. Calm. Clean. Sharp enough to slice the air. And the performance fell apart. She didn't sigh. She didn't act hurt. She didn't try to hug her way out of it like she had done so many times when she wanted something. No. She dropped the act like a coat she didn't need anymore. Her posture changed first. The shoulders went back. Chin up. Mouth stiff. Her whole expression turned flat. Bored. Annoyed I had even asked. "So what if I did?" she said. "It was just a watch. Just a watch." The room felt smaller. The air felt thinner. And my heart didn't break. No, this wasn't heartbreak. This was clarity. That watch was the one thing my brother asked me to look after the night he knew he wasn't going to make it. The kind of thing you don't leave behind in a will because the world of paper and ink isn't big enough to hold the weight of memory. We used to share it in high school, pass it back and forth before job interviews and first dates. It meant something. It was our joke, our bond, our promise. And she had taken it, sold it, and spat on it with 3 words. Just a watch. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't ask her if she understood what she'd done. I asked her the only question that mattered. Why? Not out of confusion. Not out of heartbreak. But because I needed to hear the Betrayal her speak. She didn't hesitate. She didn't soften it. She didn't try to make it sound tragic. She smirked. A slow, cold smirk. Like she was finally relieved she didn't have to pretend anymore. "Because you're easy, Mike," she said. "You're soft. You believe people. You think helping makes you a good person. But it just makes you a target." She looked proud when she said it. Like she was teaching me something valuable. Like she expected me to nod and say thank you. And that was the moment everything inside me that was warm went cold. The part of me that believed in second chances. The part of me that believed blood meant loyalty. The part of me that believed kindness came back to you. All of it gone. She had taken from me. Used me. Laughed at me. And now she was telling me it was my fault for being decent. I stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just steady. Like a man finally accepting gravity. I walked past her without another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't tell her to leave. I didn't threaten her. I just went to my room and closed the door behind me. She thought that meant she won. People like her always think silence is surrender. But she didn't understand me at all. Anger is loud. But resolve is quiet. She thought I would break. She thought I would forgive. She thought I would go on loving her simply because we shared blood. But family is not blood. Family is respect. And she had burned that bridge herself. So I sat down in the dark, my hands calm, my breath steady, and I began to do the one thing she never expected me to do. Think, not react, not beg, not defend myself. I built the shape of an idea, plan. Not angry, not violent, patient, silent, surgical. She took everything I had built for her. Now I would take back everything she thought was hers. I learned something ugly about people the day the money stopped flowing. For a long while Claire moved through my house like a shadow that paid its rent with a smile. She smoked my cigarettes, dressed in my shirts when she was cold, used my car for job interviews, and came home with excuses that sounded rehearsed. When I cut the taps, the credit, the accounts, the phony lines of credit she'd opened in my name, it wasn't an act of malice. It was a stitch in a garment I'd been sewing for months. Proof, paperwork, the cold facts that made the story real to anyone who asked. The first day she realized she couldn't pull on my money anymore, she blamed the world. She blamed bad timing and a glitch. She spent that morning rifling through drawers, muttering in a small voice that sounded too old for her. She called people who suddenly stopped answering. She paced the living room like a caged thing. That was the sound I'd been waiting for. The sound of someone who'd been feeding on another's patience being confronted with a hungry silence. She came home that evening rattled, face flushed from crying or from the strain of pretending to cry. She sat at the kitchen table, hands folded like a schoolgirl waiting for a teacher's verdict. "Uncle Mike," she said, voice small. "Something's wrong with my accounts. I don't know what happened." I let her talk. I let her unravel. It felt obscene to enjoy it, and still, a heat rose in my chest that wasn't pure hatred. It was satisfaction tempered by the memory of my brother's face, and by the long months when I'd watched the house fill again with laughter that tasted like betrayal. She started to panic. Not the loud panic of someone who gets caught and admits it, but the kind that makes bad choices faster than the sober mind can catch them. She called Rico from the bedroom and spoke in clipped tones. The words I overheard through the wall like betting slips being passed under a table. She left the house that night with a tote bag and locked my spare key in the mailbox. I let her go. I wanted her to test the edges of the trap. Then the calls started. Real estate places, pawn shops, small-time loan sharks. People I'd never met showing up at my door demanding paperwork, demanding signatures, all with that casual cruelty that comes when someone's seen the easy mark. I held my ground. I met them in the kitchen with the sort of calm that had nothing to do with being okay and everything to do with being finished with being taken advantage of. I started leaving small breadcrumbs, the kind an investigator leaves. A line of receipts showing payments stopped here. A card I'd saved tucked into an envelope marked, "For Claire." Explained to police. I fed the evidence to the people who mattered. The bank investigators were careful and clinical. They had a language for what she'd done that I didn't have. Pattern, they said. Multiple accounts. Multiple names. Social engineering. I listened and learned. It made the wound smaller, giving it a shape I could understand. The trap worked because she was used to an endless well. People like Claire, and I don't mean to be cruel with that label, but it fits her actions. They get bolder when the river of help never dries. They imagine the river will always run, regardless of the dam upstream. When the water stopped, she flooded. She lashed out. She burned bridges with the desperate ferocity of a person who has nothing left to lose. Rico noticed it first. There was a meeting behind the diner, the place where she used to hand over envelopes and take small cloth-wrapped packages in return. This time the man was furious. He waved his hands, called her names I won't repeat. I watched from the car across the street. Windows cracked a hair so my breath wouldn't fog the glass. I saw Claire back straightening as if she had rehearsed self-possession for years. But her eyes were wild. She was out of script. When someone you think you can exploit becomes unreliable, the people around them show their true colors fast. Rico moved to protect himself, and Claire looked smaller than she ever had in my house. That was when my plan shifted from asking to stopping. I'd thought about confronting, about public shaming, about the loud garden variety fallout. But what I wanted now was something quieter. Dignity returned, debts corrected, the possibility that she could see herself in a mirror and be ashamed enough to change. I wasn't naive. I knew some people never change. But I also knew that when consequences are inescapable, even the hardest shells crack. So I tightened the net. I handed over my files to the detective assigned to the fraud case. I gave recorded statements. I corroborated bank transfers and timelines. All of it was tedious, bureaucratic, but each form filled, each signature handed to an official, felt like a brick placed back into the foundation of the life she'd been trying to tear down. Where she'd built a house of cards, I was building something that wouldn't collapse from a whisper. And through it all, I kept talking to her. Not in anger, not in pity, but in a plain, weary voice. I told her to move her things out if she needed to. I told her I'd help if she chose to make it right. The offers were not for her benefit, really, they were for mine because I wanted to believe that the person who caused all of this was still salvageable. She laughed in my face at one point, a sharp, hollow sound, and that was the last time I offered kindness without consequence. When the law finally made a move, it was not a melodramatic raid. It was paperwork, calls, and a quiet knock on the door one gray morning. She opened it like she'd been sleeping, hair wild, eyes rimmed red. The officers were kind in a way that made a man want to cry. They were professionals doing their jobs, not executioners. They explained her rights and the charges. She mouthed things into the air, promises that hung like fine dust. I looked at her and felt nothing but a cold peace. The trap had been set not to humiliate but to expose. That's the thing about a well that runs dry. It brings everything into the open, and what is exposed must be faced. Once the investigation started to move, Claire's life began to unravel like the end of a knotted rope. She was arrested for a string of charges that were ugly in their simplicity. Identity theft, small-scale fraud, conspiracy. The headlines in our little town weren't national, thank God, but someone knew someone at the local paper, and names travel farther than you expect. People who'd once waved as they drove past my porch looked at the house differently. That had a sting to it, but not the kind that broke me. Instead, it underscored how far the betrayal had reached. There were hearings. Scenes in a room I had hoped never to set foot in again. Claire sat at the defendant's table and looked smaller than she'd ever looked at our kitchen. She kept glancing at me as if to ask a question I didn't want to answer. "Why did you do this?" I did answer, in court and in front of the officers, but my words were precise and spare. I told the truth. The thing people hate to hear because it removes drama and replaces it with messy reality. "She took advantage of me," I said. "I took her in. I did what a man says he'll do for family. Then I found out she was using me." Evidence was presented. Bank statements, loans opened in my name, a pattern of small transactions that had fed a bigger operation. The prosecutor was patient and effective. Watching them at work, I learned how much of justice is paperwork and persistence. I sat through days where the details were enough to make a quiet man rant, where the medical-sounding terms of forgery and falsification felt like ice water poured on whatever warmth I had left. People I'd known all my life showed up, neighbors, old co-workers, men from the VFW. They didn't all speak. Some left with looks that said, "I told you so." A few people surprised me. They sat in the courtroom and stared at Claire with something like pity in their eyes. It was a strange mixture to watch. Outrage, disappointment, a complicated brand of compassion that I think comes when you realize the victim is also the architect of their fate. Claire's defense tried to paint a picture of desperation, of a young woman squeezed between bad choices and the limited options of a struggling life. I went along with that narrative in some ways because part of me believed it, but the evidence showed method. There was intention in the way she made names and forged documents, in the way she convinced small businesses to trust her. The court can look at a lifetime and decide if a person's actions were the product of circumstance or the result of a plan. It's not an infallible machine, but it's better than leaving matters to rumor and revenge. Outside of the courtroom, her world collapsed in quieter ways. Former acquaintances stopped returning her texts. Rico's crew vanished like fog when the sun came up. The people she'd relied on to launder small gains turned their backs. And in a town where everyone has the same networks, that kind of isolation is brutal. There was no dramatic confrontation where she was publicly shamed in the town square. Instead, it was the slow erosion of practical supports. Without credit, without the ability to cash checks, the life you built on other people's trust becomes a house made of matchsticks. Her phone was a graveyard of missed calls. Her social media went quiet. When she called me, I let it go to voicemail. The messages were raw, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry. "You promised," she said in one. "You said family would always protect family." I listened to them through my truck speakers late at night and felt that old ache, the one that had turned to stone the night she sold my brother's watch. There was regret in some of her voice, but regret can be performative. I'd come to learn the difference between sorrow and the language of survival. Then came the restitution hearings. There's a cruel arithmetic to these sessions. You add up what was taken and you decide what will be paid back. The court wanted her to make reparations, and we both knew full well that the money wouldn't come. What came instead were conditions. Supervision, community service, probationary sentences that felt both merciful and merciless. The law had a way of balancing the books without making a spectacle. Some nights I found that approach comforting. I wanted repair more than I wanted punishment. I walked out of one hearing and found an old friend waiting by my truck. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, looked me in the eye and said, "You did the right thing, Mikey." The name stung in a way that made me clench my jaw. I did the right thing, but what did right look like now? It looked like paperwork and lawyers and quiet knocks on the door. It looked like a life reclaimed one small bureaucratic victory at a time. It didn't look like vengeance. It looked like methodical, stubborn repair. Claire began to disappear from my life after that. She was shuffled between programs and channels that exist for people who get caught in cycles of theft and need. Some days she would reach out and apologize in a way that felt sincere. Other days she tried to needle me with accusations that I'd set her up. I never argued. I had nothing to prove to her. The unraveling had already done its job. In the months that followed, the small community of people who knew what happened adjusted their perceptions. Gossip tried to seed itself like weeds, but most folks are busy. The world kept turning. I went back to work. I cut the lawn. I fixed a neighbor's fence when their dog got out. Life assumed the shape of ordinary days. Dishes, bills, the weather, and in that ordinariness, I found a kind of peace I hadn't known I needed. Justice, in its slow, bureaucratic way, had a way of letting you breathe again. People I'd known all my life showed up. Neighbors, old coworkers, men from the VFW. They didn't all speak. Some left with looks that said, "I told you so." A few people surprised me. They sat in the courtroom and stared at Claire with something like pity in their eyes. It was a strange mixture to watch. Outrage, disappointment, a complicated brand of compassion that I think comes when you realize the victim is also the architect of their fate. Claire's defense tried to paint a picture of desperation, of a young woman squeezed between bad choices and the limited options of a struggling life. I went along with that narrative in some ways because part of me believed it, but the evidence showed method. There was intention in the way she made names and forged documents, in the way she convinced small businesses to trust her. The court can look at a lifetime and decide if a person's actions were the product of circumstance or the result of a plan. It's not an infallible machine, but it's better than leaving matters to rumor and revenge. If you're waiting for a cinematic moment where the villain gets a big dramatic fall, this isn't that kind of story. My reckoning was boring. It was forms, signatures, deadlines met and missed. It was Claire showing up to an appointment late and then doing the work required to make amends. Not because she was repentant necessarily, but because the system nudged her that way. We sometimes confuse punishment with consequence. One humiliates, the other teaches. I wanted the latter. There were conversations with the probation officer that made me realize how little I'd known about who Claire really was. She had a past threaded through with pain. A father who left, school systems that failed her, friends who taught her to hustle rather than to ask for help. None of that excused what she did, but it explained it. It also made me furious, not just at Claire, but at a world that funnels some people into predatory patterns and then punishes them for the survival strategies they adopted. I met Claire one day in a sterile room with a window that looked over the municipal parking lot. She sat across from me, folded hands, eyes trained somewhere on the middle distance. There was a thinness to her now, a person warned by consequences. She looked old in a way I'd never seen when she'd first arrived. Not age, but exhaustion. "What do you want, Uncle Mike?" she asked, voice dry. I surprised myself by answering with something I hadn't said aloud in a long time. "I want you to stop using people. I want you to learn how to stand on your own without breaking someone else to do it." She laughed. A tiny, incredulous sound, then stopped. "You think you can teach me that?" "No," I said. "I don't think I can, but I can make it hard to continue the way you did. And if you want help finding a different path, I'll point you to someone who can show you how to start." It was the hardest offer I'd made, and perhaps the kindest. She looked at me for a long time, then looked away. "I'm not sure I'm ready," she said finally. "Maybe," I said, "but one day you'll be, or you won't. Either way, the choices will be yours." When the final sentencing came, the judge looked at her with the same mixture of sternness and faint sympathy I'd seen in other officials. Claire received a sentence that had teeth but also room for rehabilitation. Probation, restitution where possible, mandatory counseling. The judge's voice was steady, the kind that reminds you the court deals in facts and future behavior, not in the petty emotional retribution many of us crave. I left the courthouse that day feeling strangely light. It wasn't that I'd won in some conventional sense. Rather, I'd closed a chapter in which my kindness had been exploited. The reckoning was not a shout. It was a set of small, consequential changes that made abuse harder to continue. That's the sort of justice I believe in, not a theatrical undoing, but a slow, inexorable correction. People sometimes ask if I felt vindicated. In truth, my feeling was more complicated. There was relief, yes, but it sat beside a fatigue I don't think I'll ever shed entirely. I'd been the man who let himself be used out of love and loyalty. That self-image had been peeled back and replaced with a man who knows where the line sits and how to enforce it without becoming cruel. That was the real victory. Not seeing her fail, but learning to protect myself and, if possible, to help her find a way to not repeat it. In the weeks after, I took small steps back toward living. I mended things around the house. I went through the boxes of my brother's things and found, tucked between a paperback and a cigarette lighter, a photograph of us both at 17 grinning like fools. I put it on the mantel. I told myself stories, not to hide the hurt, but to make sense of it. The narrative I chose was one of limits learned and dignity reclaimed. The house was mine again. I've spent decades learning a truth most people only discover after it's too late, that smiles can lie, and words can be weapons disguised as comfort. People will tell you they care. They will make promises with syrupy voices and soft eyes. They will wrap themselves in the familiar warmth of shared history, of blood, of obligation. And if you're not careful, if you don't pay attention to the quiet little cracks in their words, in their actions, you'll find that the same people you welcomed into your life, your home, your heart, can become the architects of your ruin. Trust, I learned, isn't a gift. It isn't something you throw around lightly because someone claims to be family, or because they cry in your kitchen, or because you remember a time when they were innocent. Trust is a currency that must be earned. Slowly, painstakingly, through consistency, through integrity, through actions that prove they value you, not just what you can give them. Family, people think, is a guarantee. That the bond of blood protects you from betrayal. That simply being related means loyalty comes naturally. I've discovered it doesn't. Family is not DNA. Family is choice. Family is loyalty. It is the willingness to stand by someone, to protect, to respect, to honor them without using their kindness as a weapon. It is quiet, patient, and true. And when that choice is broken, when the ones you love exploit you, manipulate you, and steal from you under the guise of familiarity, the hurt runs deeper than anything a stranger could inflict. Claire taught me that lesson. She taught me that the person you let in first can sometimes be the one who hurts you most. She reminded me how fragile our trust can be when it is given blindly. But she also taught me something more important. That healing begins when you reclaim your boundaries, when you stop believing that loyalty is automatic, when you close the door to those who would destroy you. Firmly, finally, without apology. Because healing doesn't require their understanding. It doesn't require their recognition of the pain they caused. Healing is yours. It's yours to take, to protect, to nurture. And once you have it, once you've rebuilt your life piece by piece, once you've strengthened your trust into something unshakable, you realize that the smiles that once hid knives no longer matter. The lies no longer have power. The betrayal becomes a lesson carved in stone. I've learned to move cautiously now, but not fearfully. I've learned to love, but to guard my heart. And I've learned that the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's the life you rebuild, the peace you cultivate, and the quiet certainty that you will never again let someone walk through your door with the intent to destroy what you've built. Trust is earned, not given. Loyalty is proven, not assumed. And the door, once closed, is never just closed. It is the boundary that defines who you are, what you protect, and how far you will go to honor the life you've worked so hard to reclaim. And in that truth I found peace.